Hello, my name is Yaya. Thank you for tuning into Trauma and God. I know from personal experience that healing from the black cloud of trauma is possible, but it takes time. Just as in nature there's always sunlight behind a dark cloud, so it is for us. God is light, and He's always there. We just have to find Him. In this series, I talk about things that hinder us from finding the light and things we can do that help us overcome obstacles. Today's subject is desensitizing, or practicing controlling my adrenaline. My father was a master in the merchant navy, and his tours of duty were long, and we children never knew when he might be coming home. He was a chain smoker, so the first sign he was home came from a smell of the cigarettes. Therefore, whenever I entered our home, I always sniffed the air for that familiar smell. When he left for work, it was often during the night. He always disappeared without saying goodbye. We'd wake up and find him and the cigarette smell gone. This pattern with father continued all my growing up years. As suddenly as father appeared, he seemed to always disappear again. My father distanced himself from me for years. He refused to give me away or even attend my wedding. Yet he felt perfectly at liberty to suddenly appear unannounced at my house. We actually had a policy of feel free to pop in anytime you're passing with our friends, yet it was always uncomfortable and different with him. He felt his time was somehow more important than anyone else's. So when it was convenient for him to show up, we apparently were lucky and honored to entertain him. He felt no need for politeness. He thought it an amusing party trick to walk around to the back of the house, peer through the window and tap on the glass. Surprise! He never failed to terrify me. I felt guilty. Shouldn't I be happy to see him? I was very confused. Time passed and we moved halfway around the world to Los Angeles. I've always loved travel and airports. Colleagues, friends, and family flew in to visit us. So I had frequent calls to drive to the Los Angeles International Airport or LAX to pick them up. I even volunteered to do the airport runs. I enjoyed going to the airport so much. During this period, mother began sending emails asking me if I knew where father was because she hadn't heard from him for a very long time. My father traveled the world. Therefore, an unsettling fear came over me. My fear grew as I was increasingly convinced that father would come to LA to find me. When I was least expecting him, he would tap on my back window and shout, "Surprise!" Or far worse, I would suddenly bump into him when I was all alone on one of my airport runs. These thoughts hit hard through my fears. He had the potential of not only ruining how safe I felt in my home, but also ruining something I love to do, going to the airport and travel. The thought that he could make me terrified when doing something I love made me very angry. I decided that an adult, now married, I was mistress of my own fate. I would not let him terrify me. Trouble was, I was terrified. So what could I do? I did pray a lot about it, and I found that as I prayed, I got a sort of righteous indignation that rose up in me that just sealed it by saying, I am not going to let him do this to me. What I'm about to tell you worked for me sometimes, but talk to your counselor first and be advised by them if it's something you should be trying, perhaps under their supervision. What I chose to do was not something I spoke to a counselor about because at that point I didn't even have one. For me, it came out of personal necessity. We had recently arrived in a new country. All our finances were spent setting up a new home, and I had not yet established any personal friendships. Therefore, what I chose to do cost me nothing, and I didn't need anyone to help me. It became my first venture into what my husband later dubbed desensitizing. The dictionary definition of desensitizing is having been made less sensitive. And it's usually used as something negative. For instance, people have been made less likely to feel shock or distress at scenes of cruelty by overexposure to such images. But I used it in its positive sense, as I wrote a few days ago in an article on the BBC website called Fear, Faith, Friendship, Inside F1's Most Precious Relationship. In Formula One racing, the driver is never racing entirely alone. They are always linked to the voice of the race engineer. Both the driver and the race engineer have to learn how to keep calm during the race, no matter what happens. One race engineer named Becca said, "I actually practice managing adrenaline. I usually do a race replay where I listen to all the radio conversations, which are very chaotic, and try to practice being calm and training my voice to have a consistent volume, not speak too fast, and so on." So doing it alone, I knew I had to learn how to control my fear and practice how to handle my adrenaline. I decided I would keep going to the airport by myself, but I devised a plan on what I was going to do when I got there. Didn't tell my husband because I didn't want him to talk me out of it. Here was my plan. Park the car near to the terminal entrance, away from walls and pillars. Outside the terminal door, stop, take a deep breath, walk in like you own it. Walk calmly and breathe calmly. Stop and take deeper breaths if I couldn't. Keep to the open areas inside where he wouldn't grab me. Identify where security is so I can run to them if I need to. So with my eyes continually scanning all the people around, I would frequently turn to see if he was behind me, and I kept telling myself I was going to be all right. My father always stood out above the crowd. He was very tall, broad-shouldered, had mousy brown hair, was well-dressed, and had a bearing about him. His John Wayne good looks always got noticed, and people would turn to look at him, especially women. He was not difficult to spot. Seeing the back of someone matching his description would terrify me, and I would freeze in my tracks. So much for my plan to run to the nearest security guy. I would stand frozen like a statue on the spot for the longest time. Not until that person turned and I could see his face, or he walked out of sight, could I even attempt to unfreeze. Freezing in a busy airport is very embarrassing because people behind me would either walk into me or step around me, and as they passed, they would stare at me and make me know how terribly annoyed they were, or even curse at me. Well, it took many trips to the airport before I had practiced controlling my adrenaline enough for my panic levels to lessen. Not until they had lessened did I venture to tell my husband how I had been working to overcome my panic and fear. He was actually very proud of my endeavors at desensitizing myself. Perhaps we were both naive to potentially negative emotional repercussions in doing this. I don't know. But this time I had a very good outcome. And I never did see my father. Well, to this day, I still adopt some of the plans I put in place that time. I still visually scan an airport terminal for my now deceased father. Yes, there are still times when I panic, as someone reminds me of him. But I know how to calm myself, and I can do so fairly quickly because I have practiced being desensitized. Satan knows all our traumas, and fear is his main weapon. He wants us to live in a state of terror, making us ineffective by being overwhelmed. It stops us from being effective in the work God has given us to do. If Satan can terrify us with one trauma, he'll bring to mind another one we've had. As the nature of trauma is to create an overwhelming rush of adrenaline and fear, every trauma has the same effect on us. Starting alone, then needing a counselor. Years later, I was stalked at a church where my husband and I were pastors. The man was a loner. I'd learned that this person liked to read books, as do I. So I used the subject of books to be polite and engage him in conversation. Soon he was parked outside the front door of my home and appeared wherever I went around town. He was following me. I felt an increasing panic and terror. I was embarrassed because in trying to do a gracious thing by engaging him in conversation, I had in fact created this huge problem for myself. I no longer felt safe in my own home, and walking into the church building became increasingly hard to do. I tried the same principles I had previously applied to my airport fear. Outside the building, I'd stop, take a deep breath, and walk in like I owned it. I'd walk calmly and breathe calmly and stop when I couldn't, and I'd take deep breaths and then carry on. I kept to open areas where he wouldn't confront me. And I'd identify where safe people were so that I could instantly go to them. But this time it didn't work. I thought I might get desensitized by repeatedly walking into the building. Nope. My adrenaline levels continued to rise even higher. I couldn't manage my adrenaline or gain my calm. 8 weeks into this, I finally broke down and told my husband what was going on. He encouraged me to get professional help. Meantime, the man was spoken to by the church leaders, but he denied he was stalking me, saying I was imagining it. Through counseling, I learned that the stalking event highlighted something in me that I had to understand about myself, something I could not see. It was my counselor who showed me the truth. Therefore, I don't class this desensitizing attempt as a total failure, because it served as a constructive step for me to gain more understanding about myself and more healing. With counseling, I was finally able to manage my adrenaline and walk into the church building without having a panic attack. A short while after this, I obviously felt stronger because I found myself walking into church, going straight to him and saying, "If I ever see you near me again, I will call the police." He stayed away from me after that. Working from the beginning with a counselor, I had another attempt at desensitizing and trying to manage my adrenaline that had mixed results. For this one, my counselor was involved with me from the very beginning of the process. One day, someone of the same height and build as my father rang my front doorbell. Our house had a glazed front door and large windows to the side. I was all by myself, In my panic, I couldn't see a way of leaving the room without being noticed. So I just dropped to the floor in frozen terror in the spot where I thought I could not be seen. The man then walked to the side of the house, looking in to see if someone was inside, and he saw me. I stayed frozen. After that, we took measures to make my home feel safe. We replaced the glass door with a solid door. We rearranged our furniture to create safe corners where I could hide if I needed to. My counselor said we had to make our home a sanctuary and have people only come by appointment. Nothing we did to try and desensitize me helped. Absolutely nothing. In fact, the opposite happened. This event opened up Pandora's box in me. In Greek mythology, Pandora was the first woman on earth, and she was given a box as a gift from the gods. This box contained all the evils of the world and were released when Pandora opened the box. Well, for me, overwhelming fear, evil, and hopelessness were now released. My home was not safe. I'd worked so hard to make my home nice and comfortable. I felt stupid that such a seemingly innocent knock on the front door had such a negative and profound effect on me. Well, by this point, my weekly counseling sessions were bumped up to 2 or 3 a week. I talked a great deal, and one day my counselor said, "You were raped and abused in your own home. No wonder you don't feel safe in your home." I sobbed. She hit the nail on the head. This was something I had not seen before. But even though I reached the bottom of why I felt unsafe in my home, it didn't change the fact that I still felt unsafe in my home. We made the decision to move. With input from my counselor and husband, we set in place a list of what we had to find in a new home for me to start feeling safe again. Several homes, and some years later, I still have not come to the point of feeling totally safe in my home. No amount of practice has helped me completely control my adrenaline. When in my home, I'm easily triggered into high alert status. Despite this, I haven't given up practicing how to control my adrenaline. I know that the memory of trauma and my trauma reactions will always be there, but over time, many of my trauma responses have become much calmer, making my PTSD more manageable. My ultimate goal is also God's plan for me, to find joy and peace in my home in the middle of my traumas. As a 3-year-old child, I couldn't stop my father raping and abusing me. I was a victim to his disgusting behavior, and after that, I lived on constant high alert. As an adult, I have a choice as to how I respond. Desensitizing has helped me learn to practice controlling my adrenaline and remain calm in many situations, but not all. Steps towards healing are never taken in a straight line. We meander. We need God's help. We need the help of professionals. We also need to believe that we are our own best advocates. We should try to help ourselves. We're not victims. We're victors in the story. God does not traumatize us, only Satan. And fear is his tool to do that. When trauma does rise up in me, God picks up the pieces and reminds me of what I have conquered and how far I have already come in my healing. If I stick with God on this journey, he will never let me go. Satan whispers that it's hopeless. When I'm tempted to feel hopeless, I've learned to remind myself and Satan that I have God on my side. God is bigger than Satan. God is stronger than Satan. And God has already won the heavenly battle. There is nothing to fear. God does not use fear to control us. He wants a love relationship with us. God always wants the best for me. Always. Not the worst. He can give me peace and joy in the middle of every single circumstance in which I and you find yourself in. The first in 1 Corinthians chapter 10 verse 13 in the Amplified Version, it says so. No temptation, regardless of its source, has overtaken or enticed you that is not common to human experience. Nor is any temptation unusual or beyond human resistance. But God is faithful to his word. He is compassionate and trustworthy, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability to resist. But along with the temptation he has in the past and is now and will always provide the way out as well, so that you will be able to endure it without yielding and will overcome temptation with joy. If you found this talk helpful, please subscribe and tell a friend. You may email me, Yaya, at traumaandgod@gmail.com, or read my personal story, Snakes in the Loo, at amazon.com. If this stirs things in you, please reach out and talk to a mental health professional. In the US, help is also available at the following: Suicide and Crisis Helpline, 1-800-273-8255. Rape, Abuse and Incest National Network Helpline, 1-800-656-4673. God is for you, and so am I. Tune in next Thursday at 10 for more helpful stories. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.